Lake of Death. If it weren't for that letter, I would have never spoken about this. It arrived with no return address, sealed in a stained envelope, my name scrawled in shaky ballpoint pen. Inside, a USB drive. On it, a video that changed everything. And a voice I recognized instantly. Howard's voice. He's been missing for over a year. The police found nothing. No body. No car. No trace. He simply vanished after heading to a remote village near a lake in Pennsylvania. Briar Glen. You've probably never heard of it. But if you read this story to the end, you'll never forget the name. Howard wasn't someone who scared easily. He wasn't naive, or some thrill-seeking amateur. Quite the opposite, methodical, skeptical, obsessed with facts. He had a deep fascination with things that didn't fit, unsolved disappearances, off-the-grid towns, bizarre coincidences people liked to ignore. He produced documentaries, not cheap horror junk, but actual investigations, walking the razor's edge between myth and reality. Everything shifted when he found an old newspaper clipping from 1972, a line buried in the crime section, another one went to the water and never came back. The lake has claimed its own again. That line stuck with him. Within a week, he had maps, interviews, historical notes, and a theory that gave me chills: this place isn't just cursed. It's calling someone. I didn't believe him. And now I regret not going with him. Howard disappeared in October. His last call was disjointed, fragments about a mirror in the water, and time freezing if you stare long enough. The police dismissed it as a mental break. But now, I have video no one else has seen. Footage that defies logic. And more than that, audio, where Howard says something I still can't explain: if you're hearing this, I might still be here. But not on the same side. I don't know if he's dead. I don't know if he's alive. But I do know this: something by that lake is waiting. And I'm not sure it wants to be found. This is my attempt to tell Howard's story. Using his notes, his footage, our messages, and what I experienced myself when I followed his trail. Maybe you'll think it's fiction. And maybe I would too, if I hadn't seen what shouldn't exist. Howard arrived at Briar Glen with a simple goal: to investigate the disappearance of his friend Eliza, who vanished near the lake. At first, it seemed like a straightforward task: find clues, talk to the locals. But with every step, the town revealed darker secrets. The village was small, with narrow streets shaded by old trees and houses that seemed to hold the past within their walls. People were reluctant to speak about the lake. Elders warned Howard to stay away from its shores, as strange things happened there: numerous disappearances, whispers in the dark, ghostly figures. Howard spent his first evening walking the shores. The wind whispered through the leaves, and it felt as if the lake itself was watching him. The water was dark and cold, as if it held the shadow of everyone who had ever entered. The next day, he met Margot, an old woman who was the local historian and claimed to know much about the lake's dark past. She told him that over 150 years ago, the first settlers faced strange disappearances and deadly incidents. People then spoke of the curse of the lake, a malevolent force that consumed souls and dragged them into the abyss. Howard learned of an old archive holding records from that time: diaries, letters, official reports. He immediately realized that to uncover the truth, he would need to dive deep into these records and unravel the hidden trails. However, the archive was guarded jealously. Local authorities and some elders believed it was better to leave the past alone, not to awaken the darkness sleeping beneath the water. But Howard insisted and gradually gained permission. The first records astonished him. They told of disappearances starting just after strange symbols appeared, carved into stones and trees along the shore. Elders linked these to rituals intended to calm the lake, but it seemed these rites only fed something evil. Further documents contained eyewitness accounts: people who saw ghostly silhouettes, heard children crying in the night silence, or saw shadows swimming beneath the water. One diary belonged to a boy who vanished without a trace, leaving a note: "They call me into the lake." Meanwhile, Howard made his own observations. He noticed the lake behaved differently at various times. During the full moon, the water became clearer, but in its depths, movements could be seen that belonged neither to fish nor animals. At night, the lantern light on the shore cast long shadows that seemed to whisper, and the wind sometimes carried strange sounds, cries, moans, even voices. In the town, Howard met several residents who had their own stories about the lake. One, Sam, spoke of his wife disappearing after they went to the lake together. He didn't believe in ghosts but said what happened was unnatural. Another, a local teacher, described how children feared approaching the lake, telling of water that whispers and shadows that wanted to pull them in. All these stories shared one thought: the lake lived its own life and did not want to be disturbed. Howard began mapping the disappearances, dates, names, circumstances. Analyzing the data, he noticed a strange pattern: all missing people, in their last days near the lake, spoke of strange dreams, delirious visions, and a feeling of being watched. He also noticed each disappearance was accompanied by a mysterious smell of damp earth and decay, which he often sensed himself while standing on the shore. Over time, Howard doubted his own sanity. Sleep became restless and shallow, his dreams grew more horrific and vivid. In them, Eliza called to him from the water, whispering words he couldn't understand but remembered with terrible clarity. He could no longer ignore this and decided to spend a night on the lake shore, hoping to understand what was really happening. There, in the darkness, when silence became almost painful, he heard the first true whisper. It was a voice barely reaching his ears but sounded irresistible, as if calling him to some destiny. That night changed everything. Howard began to realize the story of the lake was not just a terrible legend. It was something alive, ancient, and very dangerous. After the ritual, Howard thought he could finally leave the lake and its dark secrets behind. But the world around him began to change, small details became increasingly unsettling, and the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred more and more. Just days after his encounter with Eliza, Howard felt that someone or something was constantly watching him. Rumors spread through the village about new disappearances, and people who once seemed ordinary grew distant, as if under the influence of an invisible force. Howard returned to his notes and footage, but every time he tried to capture the feelings he had by the lake, his equipment malfunctioned, cameras froze, recordings disappeared, or became distorted with strange noises. Later, he met a young psychic named Lena, who had come to Briar Glen after hearing about the strange events. She immediately sensed the lake's energy and offered to help. Lena explained that the darkness surrounding the lake was not just local legend. She felt that an ancient spirit lived there, tied to primal fear and loss. This spirit fed on fear and the memory of death, so every new disappearance only strengthened it. Meanwhile, Howard found an old diary belonging to one of the first settlers, John Miller. The entries described events over 150 years ago when people had already started disappearing in the village. John wrote about strange rituals the elders performed to try to contain the dark force, but it turned out these rituals only made things worse. This discovery forced Howard to rethink his strategy. He realized that his search for truth and desire to save Eliza might have accidentally awakened something far worse. One evening, while Howard and Lena were exploring the lake's shores together, they noticed the water moving strangely, as if someone was swimming or trying to break through the surface. Lena began chanting a prayer, and Howard filmed everything. Suddenly, a powerful shadow burst from the lake, momentarily darkening everything around. Howard felt a cold hand clutch his heart, and a voice, as if from the depths of an abyss, whispered his name. This event was a turning point. They realized now the lake's spirits were not just seeking freedom. They were hunting. Howard and Lena began preparing for the final confrontation. They gathered ancient artifacts, studied spells, trying to find a way to either suppress the lake's power or seal its darkness forever. But every step they took only deepened the danger. The lake began calling forth stronger storms, and disappearances became more frequent. One day, during the harshest rainstorm, Howard received a mysterious unsigned letter. It contained only one plea: leave Briar Glen before it was too late. The story that began as a quest to uncover a mystery was now a fight for survival. Howard realized his challenge was not just an investigation, but a true war against an evil that should never have been awakened. Howard understood that without knowing the past, he wouldn't solve the mysteries of Death Lake. So, he began his investigation with the elders, those who had lived in Briar Glen their entire lives and preserved oral legends never recorded in official documents. The first meeting was with Margot, an elderly woman considered the living encyclopedia of the village. Her home was filled with old books, yellowed newspaper clippings, scrolls, and notes telling stories from distant times. She spoke slowly and cautiously, as if afraid that her words might awaken something dark better left forgotten. The lake was never a simple place, she began, it's a place where time seems to stand still, and the water hides many secrets. She told how back in the 19th century, when settlers arrived, the first strange disappearances began. People vanished without a trace, and no one could explain what was happening. Authorities tried to hush up these cases, fearing panic, but over time, terrible legends about Death Lake spread. The most chilling was the story of the Wilson family, who lost 3 children over different years, all near the lake. No one ever saw the children enter the water, but their toys appeared on the shore in the morning. Locals believed the lake took souls, not bodies. Howard asked Margot to tell him more about the archives. She agreed to take him to an ancient repository in the basement of the local library. The archive was nearly forgotten, hidden behind several locks, but it contained records shedding light on the village's history. The documents dated back to the mid-19th century and included official reports, correspondence, settlers' diaries, and local newspapers. Most were yellowed and fragile, but the information was priceless. Howard immersed himself in these materials. There he found testimonies about strange symbols appearing on trees and stones along the lake, which no one could explain. Some documents mentioned mysterious rituals supposedly conducted to calm the lake, but the details of these rites remained a mystery. Diaries written by locals contained descriptions of ghostly silhouettes appearing in the mist, whispers heard in the night silence, and the fear and hopelessness that gripped the people. One testimony belonged to a man named Thomas, who described how his young son disappeared after seeing something non-human in the water. Thomas wrote that his son began speaking strange things and cried in his sleep until one day he simply vanished. Another part of the archive held court investigation records, official attempts to explain the disappearances, all ending unsuccessfully or with official versions satisfying no one. As Howard studied the archives, he realized that the story of Death Lake was not just a series of tragic events but something much deeper. It became clear that the darkness lurking beneath the surface had its own mind and will. At the same time, meetings with elders revealed another crucial detail: most feared speaking openly, not because they didn't want to share, but out of fear, the fear of a curse falling on those who disturbed the balance. Howard understood, to uncover the truth, he would have to cross the boundaries of the usual, to dive into the mysteries that had kept Briar Glen in fear for centuries. Howard felt the cold wind seep into every fiber of his body as he finally stood at the shore of Death Lake in complete darkness. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and only occasionally did a faint rustle of leaves break the silence in the distance. The lake seemed alive, it whispered silent words calling him closer. After months of investigation, sleepless nights, and pressure from all sides, he found himself on the verge of solving the mystery, but also on the verge of losing his mind. What he had discovered was more terrifying than he could imagine. From archives, elders' testimonies, and his own observations, he realized, the lake was a portal, a boundary between two worlds where time and space lost meaning. It fed on the energy of the vanished, and every disappearance was a kind of exchange between worlds. The mysterious symbols, rituals, whispers, and ghosts, all these were not mere myths but parts of a dreadful mechanism that maintained balance and, at the same time, a curse. That night, he came here to stop it. From the elders, he knew of an ancient ritual that could end the cycle of disappearances, but the ritual was dangerous and demanded a strong will. He took from his backpack artifacts, old symbols carefully gathered from trees and stones, and a written text of the ritual found in one of the archive's hidden spots. Everything was ready. The silence was shattered by a sharp cry from the darkness. Howard turned and saw a shadow moving silently as if the water itself had come alive and taken form. It was something vague, but in its eyes, he saw pain, fear, and rage. "You should not have come here," it whispered, a voice carrying both threat and plea. Howard felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, and the water began to splash in eerie rhythms. He started reciting the incantation, trying to ignore the voices urging him to stay, run, or succumb to fear. The ritual activated the symbols, which began glowing with a soft blue light reflected in the water. The shadow rose higher, unfolding into a human shape, but its contours were uneven, as if made of water and mist simultaneously. It stretched out a hand, and coldness seeped into Howard's bones. He understood, this was a soul lost between worlds, cursed to remain here forever until someone performed the ritual. Suddenly, other shadows appeared, once lost, now trapped in this dimension. They silently watched as if awaiting judgment. Howard finished the ritual and felt cold and darkness begin to retreat. The lake became quiet, almost peaceful. The shadows started to dissolve into the air, and the whispers changed into a soft song. He fell to his knees, exhausted and bewildered, yet with the feeling that something had changed forever. At the same time, he felt the cold breath of the unknown. Had the curse truly vanished, or was it only a pause in an eternal struggle? Howard rose, looked at the lake shimmering in the moonlight, and realized, now he was part of this story, part of a mystery that would never give peace. After that dreadful ritual, Howard returned to a world that felt different, as if time and space had slightly shifted, and the air around was filled with a subtle blend of fear and hope at once. He understood, this was not the end, but merely the beginning of a new chapter in this terrifying story. Days passed, and the disappearances stopped. The elders, who once feared even uttering the name of the lake, began to speak of the strange calm that had come. Some even believed the curse was lifted. But Howard felt something remained unchanged. Every dream was now filled with shadows that never let him go, even in sleep. Every whisper of the wind seemed to remind him that the lake had not forgotten him. He returned to the archives once again, seeking answers that could explain the new visions. There, in the old documents, he found what his heart had been searching for, a message encrypted in symbols he had already seen on the shore. "The cycle is broken, but the threshold is open." These words sounded both like a warning and a challenge. Howard realized his mission was not over. The lake remained a place of power, a place where light and darkness collided, and only the bravest could hold the balance. He decided to stay in Briar Glen to guard this place, so that no one would ever again become a victim of the darkness. The story of Death Lake became his own story, a story about struggle, loss, and hope, about the incomprehensible that is always near. He took his first step into the new night, looking at the still surface of the lake, which now reflected not only the moon but seemed to hold countless secrets within. It was the beginning of a new cycle, more complex, more dangerous, but also more human. And as light and shadows fought, Howard knew one thing: he was not alone. Evening fell over Briar Glen, and Death Lake seemed to swallow darkness deeper than ever before. Howard stood on the shore, gazing at the glass-like surface of the water reflecting the last rays of the sun. Over these months, he had endured so much: fear, doubts, sleepless nights, countless investigations. And now, everything was reaching its logical conclusion. His thoughts drifted back to the night of the climax, to the ritual that seemed to have stopped the endless cycle of disappearances. Yet an inner voice whispered, this was only temporary relief. The lake held many more secrets hidden deep beneath the water. He felt his mission was nearing its end but understood that the truth would not come easy. What he would discover would change everything, not just his life, but the fates of those who had ever set foot on this shore. Suddenly, the air thickened as if time itself had stopped. A thin white mist appeared over the lake, slowly crawling above the water. From the mist emerged faint silhouettes, souls of the vanished who had not found peace. Howard felt a chill to his bones but did not retreat. He knew he had to speak with these entities, as they held the key to the final truth. "Why have you not found peace?" he whispered. The answer was wordless but felt deeply within his consciousness: the curse of the lake could not be lifted by a simple ritual. Its essence lay in the balance between worlds, and every soul that left this world was bound to it, one way or another. Only acceptance and sacrifice can break this cycle, came the silent message. Howard realized that his own soul was now partly tied to the lake. It was his price for what he had learned and endured. There was no turning back. He stepped into the mist, feeling the water begin to wash over his feet, and suddenly memories flashed before him, the first disappearances, old legends, the fears of the people. The light gradually faded, but in Howard's heart, a realization shone: only by passing through darkness can one find true light. And as he fully immersed in the mist, the lake around began to glow with a pale, cold lamp that seemed to wrap him in the embrace of eternity. The last whisper that reached him was both a farewell and a new beginning. Howard knew, his story did not end here. Death Lake would remain a mystery long beyond the reach of both the living and the dead.